"You're too poor for my wedding." The words appeared on my phone, sharp and cold. My chest tightened, not with fear, not with anger, but with the sudden, icy clarity that decades of patience, investment, and silent support had been measured as entitlement in my son's eyes. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, letting the silence stretch. The house around me seemed to pause. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the old wall clock suspended in tension. As if waiting for my next move, shock arrived first, crashing through my mind. How could a man grown, a man I raised, speak with such blatant disregard? Confusion followed immediately, weaving through my thoughts. I recalled every moment I had quietly shouldered responsibilities for him, smoothed over his mistakes, made generosity invisible so that he would not feel indebted. And now, all of it was dismissed with 3 careless words. A judgment delivered without consideration. Then came the mystery gap, a space I knew well. The space between what I had always assumed and what reality had suddenly revealed. He believed the world owed him. He had assumed my support was a given, unending, unremarkable. The truth, now unavoidable, demanded attention. Within that gap, my mind began to weigh options, consider actions, and plan restraint. It was here, in the silence between shock and clarity, that the promise of measured response emerged. I rose from my chair deliberately, each step purposeful, and walked through the house. The living room, filled with family photographs of milestones long past, now felt almost alien. Those frozen smiles, frozen memories, seemed to whisper a quiet warning. Every act of generosity carries weight, and every assumption of entitlement has limits. I paused by the fireplace, letting morning light spill across the polished floor, illuminating both the room and the calculation forming in my mind. Promise solidified into intention. I would act, but not with anger. I would teach, but not humiliate. I would set consequences, visible and inescapable, but without spectacle. My actions would be deliberate, ethical, and completely undeniable, a lesson in respect, accountability, and the quiet authority that comes with age. I returned to the study, opening the contract folder for the wedding venue. $70,000, the deposit I had quietly covered, was sitting there, ready to be released at his command. The same generosity that had been assumed for years would now become the instrument of clarity. I reviewed the cancellation policy carefully, noting every clause, every timeline, every step necessary to reverse the transaction without legal complication. Nothing could be left to chance. The phone buzzed again with another message. "Dad, it's just a wedding. Why are you making this complicated?" I did not reply. I did not need to. Complexity is not in the act itself, but in the perception and consequence. The lesson begins not in confrontation, but in the revelation of results. He will realize in time that privilege without acknowledgement carries consequences far heavier than any lecture could ever deliver. Hours passed as I moved deliberately through small household tasks. Folding laundry, organizing papers, straightening books. Each act was simple, mundane, yet deliberate. The physicality grounded me while the lesson I had set into motion quietly began its work. I considered my son, grown in years, inexperienced in accountability, conditioned to see generosity as an entitlement. Today, that illusion would fracture. Midday arrived, and I sat at the dining table, eyes on the window. The sunlight cast long patterns across the floor, illuminating the quiet anticipation of change. I thought of every moment I had quietly intervened in his life to shield him, to ensure comfort, to smooth over mistakes. And now, the power had shifted. The consequences would be silent, legal, and undeniable. I picked up the phone again, but did not open a reply. I simply watched the screen, waiting for the first stirrings of comprehension. "Dad, what did you do?" The question would come, but it was not for me to answer yet. The lesson requires observation first, internalization second, and acknowledgement last. Authority in this form is quiet, immovable, and relentless. By evening, I had confirmed every transaction, verified the cancellation, and allowed the results to stand on their own. No threats, no shouts, no emotional outbursts. Only clarity. Only the silent assertion of consequence. The house, bathed in the warm glow of lamps, felt calm yet heavy with expectation. My hands rested on the arm of the chair as I sipped my tea. And the first faint shifts in energy, subtle but unmistakable, began to permeate the household. Messages arrived sporadically, each one a thread pulling at his understanding. "Dad, please explain." I remained calm. I did not answer immediately. Silence in this case was more instructive than words. By withholding immediate reaction, I allowed him to feel the weight of his assumptions. I allowed the space for comprehension to take root organically, without interference. Night fell, and I watched the faint glow of the city lights outside the window. The day's work had been done without spectacle, without drama, yet its impact would be profound. He would understand in time, as all lessons of consequence are ultimately understood. And in that quiet awareness, I felt the steady satisfaction of deliberate action, of measured authority, and of a lesson delivered in the calmest, most indelible manner possible. For decades, I had shaped patience into power. Today, the invisible scaffolding of my influence had revealed itself. And tomorrow, my son would encounter the first undeniable reality. Respect is earned. Entitlement has boundaries, and every action carries consequence. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the house to settle around me, aware that in the silence of this evening, a storm had quietly begun, a storm of comprehension, accountability, and the first tremors of humility. The morning after the cancellation. The house is quiet, but it carries an unfamiliar weight. Every sound, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant rustle of leaves outside, feels amplified. I move deliberately through the rooms, aware of the shift that has begun. There is no triumph in my steps, only the calm understanding that lessons of consequence are subtle, slow, and effective when observed rather than forced. My son calls mid-morning. The hesitation in his voice is unmistakable. "Dad, about the wedding. I need to talk." I listen without interruption. He fumbles over words, attempting to justify, to reason, to reclaim a control that has quietly slipped from him. Every excuse, every explanation, only reinforces the lesson I set in motion yesterday. I respond in short, precise statements, letting the weight of reality speak louder than my voice ever could. I move to the living room, watching the soft morning light spill across family photographs on the mantel. Frozen moments of joy now feel heavy, almost accusatory. Each smile and gaze reminds me of the patience I've exercised for decades. I sit, allowing them to speak while I remain steady, composed. Power is not demonstrated in arguments. It is revealed through calm observation, ethical restraint, and the patient unfolding of consequence. Hours pass. Messages come intermittently. "Dad, why did this happen?" "I don't understand." I do not reply immediately. The lesson is in the gap between expectation and realization. I make tea, watching steam curl slowly from the cup, meditating on how quietly an action can teach far more than words. Each notification on my phone is a signal, not a demand. Each moment of hesitation on his part is a tiny victory for clarity. By afternoon, he arrives at the house, his expression sober and unguarded. Gone is the arrogance, replaced by cautious awareness. He sits across from me, hands resting lightly on his knees, waiting for instruction or explanation. I offer neither. My presence alone, calm, deliberate, unshakable, communicates the lesson far more effectively than speech ever could. He begins, hesitant but honest, acknowledging the assumptions he made, the entitlement he took for granted, and the mistakes of presuming generosity as obligation. I respond in measured tones, reinforcing that accountability is not punitive, but inevitable. Respect, I explain, cannot be demanded. It must be observed, internalized, and demonstrated. He nods, slowly taking in the weight of this reality. Evening falls, soft and golden. I retreat to the study, reviewing documents, and confirming the results of the previous day. Everything aligns: the cancellation, the return of the deposit, the absence of dispute. Each step was deliberate, precise, legal, ethical. Nothing has been left to chance. The lesson exists now in the clarity of action itself. Late at night, his messages come again. Dad, I think I understand. I need to reconsider. I do not reply. Understanding is not reinforced by acknowledgement. It manifests in the shift of behavior, in the pause before entitlement asserts itself, in the thoughtful consideration of consequence. The quiet authority of restraint has taken root. I sit by the window, sipping tea, watching the faint glow of city lights in the distance. I reflect on the subtle power of patience, the authority that comes from decades of measured action, and the undeniable truth that lessons are more lasting when they are experienced rather than lectured. Tonight, the balance has shifted. The household feels calmer, yet charged with awareness. The weight of responsibility is now visible, undeniable, and personal. I lean back in the chair, letting the evening settle around me. The first tremors of comprehension are evident in his behavior, in the restraint of his tone, in the hesitations between his words. The lesson will continue to unfold, but its foundation has been laid with deliberate precision. I am content, not with control, but with the quiet certainty that ethical action, patience, and observation have created the space for understanding and growth. And as I sit, letting the night deepen, I realize that true authority is not shouted or forced. It is measured, deliberate, quiet, and it is far more powerful than arrogance could ever hope to be. The following morning arrives with a stillness that is almost palpable. Light spills into the house through frost-lined windows, soft but revealing. I walk through the living room slowly, each step measured, aware that the quiet atmosphere is part of the lesson itself. The absence of immediate confrontation has created a space where accountability can breathe. My son's texts begin again. Shorter this time, tentative. Dad, are you serious? Did you really cancel everything? I do not reply. I do not need to. The power of silence is undeniable. Words are often forgotten. Consequences, however, linger. They settle in the mind and stir reflection. By letting him absorb the reality without interference, I am allowing the lesson to embed itself naturally. By mid-morning, he arrives at the house. His posture is cautious, his eyes carrying a mix of confusion and unease. Gone is the arrogance of entitlement, replaced with the subtle tremor of recognition. I meet him calmly, without accusation, without confrontation. We sit across from each other at the dining table, the light from the window illuminating the polished surface. I make no gestures beyond settling into the chair, calm and composed, letting my presence communicate authority. He begins haltingly, trying to rationalize, to explain, to reclaim control. Dad, I don't understand. I thought this would be fine. That you'd support me no matter what. I remain silent, allowing the weight of his own words to land. Every hesitation, every shift in his tone, reinforces the reality I'm carefully constructing. Patience, observation, and ethical restraint are teaching lessons more powerful than argument or anger ever could. I finally speak, voice calm, measured. Support is not unconditional. Respect is not owed. Entitlement without acknowledgement leads to consequences. The deposit, the venue, the preparations, they were never yours to manipulate. Today, you experience the natural outcome of assumptions unchecked. His face shifts. I see the flicker of comprehension, the subtle recognition that life does not bend to arrogance or assumption. He nods slowly, though his eyes still search mine for reassurance. I offer none. The lesson is not to soothe, it is to reveal reality. Accountability is not always comfortable. It is sometimes inconvenient, even painful, but necessary for growth. We continue talking for hours. He confesses cautiously the ways he has relied on generosity, the times he assumed privilege without gratitude, the missteps in judging what could be taken for granted. I listen, responding only to clarify, to reinforce, to guide, without lecturing or shaming. The lesson is experiential. The realization must be internal, not imposed. As the afternoon stretches into evening, I review the logistics of the canceled event once more. Every document, every confirmation, every notice of reversal is in order. The $70,000 deposit sits quietly reclaimed, its absence now speaking louder than any scolding ever could. I feel a steady satisfaction, not in having caused discomfort, but in having created clarity. My son leaves before dinner, quieter than when he arrived, slower in his movements, a subtle humility marking each step. The absence of confrontation, the weight of consequence, and the visibility of action have begun to imprint themselves on his understanding. I remain seated, watching the long shadows stretch across the room, aware that this is the true power of patience and deliberate action. Lessons do not need to be shouted, they need only to exist. Night falls. I sit alone with a cup of tea, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood settling into winter quiet. I reflect on decades of quiet guidance, on the patience that has shaped my influence, and on the authority born of ethical action rather than volume. The lesson is not over, but the foundation is solid. My son will carry this understanding forward, whether silently or in acknowledgement. Messages arrive sporadically. Dad. I see now. I will think about it. I'll make changes. I do not respond. Words are unnecessary. Comprehension is demonstrated in action, in pauses, in reflection. I lean back in the chair, letting the quiet of the house and the deliberate calm of the evening reinforce the lesson already set in motion. I watch the frost outside, the pale glow of distant lights. I feel the satisfaction that comes from authority exercised not through coercion, but through clarity, not through anger, but through deliberate consequence. The balance has shifted. The entitlement that assumed power has met reality. And in that meeting, respect, accountability, and understanding begin to grow. I sip my tea slowly, allowing warmth to spread, aware that tomorrow will bring further signs of comprehension, subtle, cumulative, undeniable. And as I sit in that stillness, I know the quiet work of influence is often the most powerful. It shapes perception, fosters reflection, and builds lessons that endure far longer than any shouted correction. The next morning dawns bright, almost deceptively calm. The sunlight streams through the windows, glinting off the polished floors and casting long, precise shadows. I move slowly through the house, every step deliberate, aware that the energy has shifted. The atmosphere is heavier now, charged with the subtle tension of comprehension beginning to settle in my son. There is no confrontation today, no raised voices, only the quiet impact of consequence. His first message arrives mid-morning. Dad, I think I need to reconsider everything. I didn't understand before. I read it once, set the phone aside, and let the silence fill the room. There is power in inaction. There is authority in restraint. By allowing him to reflect without interference, the lesson solidifies. Every unspoken word, every deliberate pause, weighs more than any lecture. I move to the study, reviewing the contracts again. Every confirmation, every notice, every reversed payment is in order. The $70,000 deposit that once represented entitlement now sits quietly reclaimed. Its absence is far more instructive than any conversation I could have had. I think back on the years of silent support, smoothing over mistakes, absorbing responsibility, and realize that today, the balance has finally shifted. By late morning, my son appears at the house, hesitant, cautious, visibly carrying the weight of realization. Gone is the brash arrogance that characterized his previous interactions. He sits across from me, posture tense, hands fidgeting on his knees, eyes searching mine for guidance or reprieve. I offer neither. My calm presence, measured breathing, and deliberate stillness communicate more than words ever could. He begins, haltingly, admitting the assumptions he had made, the ways he had taken for granted, both my support and the household I had maintained. I listen, allowing him to articulate, to process, to feel the subtle pressure of consequence. Every gesture, every pause, every faltering word reinforces the lesson. Authority is not demonstrated through volume. It is revealed through quiet, consistent, and ethical action. The conversation stretches into the afternoon. He recounts past mistakes, recognizes overlooked responsibilities, and begins to see the disparity between assumption and reality. I respond only when necessary, my words precise, clear, and calm. I reinforce that accountability is not punishment, but recognition of consequence. Respect is not demanded. It is internalized, acknowledged, and reflected in behavior. By mid-afternoon, I notice small shifts in his demeanor, the hesitation before speaking, the careful consideration in his tone, the subtle humility in posture. These are the first indicators that understanding is beginning to root. I remain still, allowing the realization to unfold naturally. The absence of my interference amplifies the lesson. Later, I step into the kitchen and prepare a cup of tea, allowing the steam and warmth to provide a moment of meditation. I think about the years I have quietly influenced my son's life, the patience required to guide without confrontation, and the authority gained through deliberate, measured action. Each movement I make is purposeful, reinforcing stability, calm, and presence. Evening begins to fall, casting golden light across the walls and floors. The house, usually a place of comfort and routine, now carries a weight of reflection. I sit in my favorite chair, observing the subtle signs of change in my son, who has moved to the living room with a quiet seriousness. He reviews his decisions, revisits his assumptions, and slowly begins to map out a path forward that aligns with responsibility and understanding. Messages continue to arrive sporadically. Dad, I see it now. I need to rethink my actions. I understand what you did. I do not respond. Words are unnecessary. Understanding is not solidified through acknowledgement. It is demonstrated through reflection, adjustment, and conscious decision-making. The lesson, once internalized, manifests naturally in choices and behavior. Night approaches. The house is calm, bathed in the soft glow of lamps and the reflections of city lights through frost-lined windows. I sit quietly, sipping my tea, reflecting on the progression of the day. The lesson has moved beyond theory. It is tangible, evident in the atmosphere, in the tone of conversation, and in the deliberate shifts in my son's behavior. I think of the balance between authority and patience, of power exercised without drama, and of the subtle force of consequence. I realize that every intervention, every carefully measured act over decades, has led to this moment. And in this stillness, I feel the weight of quiet triumph, a lesson taught not through anger, not through confrontation, but through unwavering calm, ethical action, and the deliberate orchestration of consequence. By the time midnight arrives, the house is enveloped in silence. My son sits alone in contemplation, the realization of responsibility finally sinking in. I remain in my chair, the faint warmth of tea still in my hands, knowing the foundation of understanding has been firmly laid. Tomorrow will bring further growth, deeper comprehension, and the subtle but undeniable transformation of behavior. In that calm, reflective moment, I understand fully, Authority is not the volume of one's voice, nor the display of anger or dominance. True power is quiet, measured, and ethical. Respect is not demanded, it is cultivated, observed, and internalized. And tonight, in the quiet of the house and the glow of the lamps, that truth begins to crystallize, shaping not just the lesson, but the man who receives it. The next morning feels charged in a way that is impossible to ignore. The sunlight pours through the windows, illuminating every surface, every photograph, every corner of the house. The atmosphere carries the weight of yesterday's revelations. I walk slowly from room to room, absorbing the subtle shifts in energy. Each step is deliberate, each breath controlled, every movement purposeful. Today, the lesson continues, unspoken yet undeniably present. My son's calls come at intervals, hesitant, fragmented, reflecting the inner turmoil I can sense even through distance. Dad, I've been thinking. I didn't realize. I didn't mean. The words trail off. I do not reply immediately. There is no need. The power of silence, of letting consequence speak for itself, is far greater than any reassurance or explanation I could provide. He must arrive at comprehension himself. By mid-morning, he appears at the house. The difference in his demeanor is unmistakable. The arrogance of entitlement has faded, replaced by a quiet unease. He approaches cautiously, careful not to trigger frustration, aware of the invisible authority that has always accompanied me. He sits across from me, hands folded, posture rigid yet attentive. I do not rise. I remain seated, calm, deliberate, allowing my presence to communicate more than words ever could. He begins to speak, stumbling through admissions of pride, presumption, and lack of understanding. I thought I could take things for granted. I didn't see how much effort, how much thought. His words falter as he finally confronts the reality he had ignored for so long. I listen, responding only when necessary with calm precision, reinforcing that accountability is not punishment, it is recognition of consequence. Throughout the day, I observe him carefully. Small gestures, subtle shifts in posture, hesitations in speech, each reveals the depth of realization taking root. His assumptions about entitlement are slowly unraveling. I remain composed, the silent observer, the steady presence. Authority is not loud. It is felt in action, in the quiet demonstration of consistency, in the ethical execution of consequences. Afternoon stretches into evening. I move to the study to review documents and correspondence related to the wedding. Every transaction, every confirmation, every reversed payment has been executed flawlessly. The $70,000 deposit, the symbol of assumed privilege, now sits quietly reclaimed. Its absence is the most potent lesson of all. Words may be ignored, logic may be resisted, but the undeniable truth of action cannot be disputed. My son continues to reflect, his demeanor shifting incrementally. He paces the living room, stops to glance at photographs, runs his hand through his hair, and returns to the table, each movement indicating internal struggle and dawning comprehension. The quiet authority I maintain, the absence of confrontation, and the presence of deliberate consequence are orchestrating the lesson with precision. Messages arrive sporadically. Dad, I see it now. I didn't understand before. I need to change. I do not reply. Comprehension cannot be delivered, it must be realized. Every pause, every reflection, every careful reconsideration of actions reinforces the depth of the lesson. I sip tea slowly, observing not just the house, but the transformation occurring within the man who once assumed privilege without acknowledgement. Evening settles, casting warm light across the rooms. I sit by the window, watching shadows lengthen and stretch across the polished floors. The quiet, deliberate measures taken over the past days are manifesting as subtle but undeniable changes. He no longer moves with arrogance. He no longer assumes generosity without thought. The lesson is becoming internalized, not through coercion, but through observation, consequence, and ethical demonstration. As night deepens, the house hums softly with its own rhythm. My son finally sits quietly in the living room, hands clasped, posture reflective. The shift is tangible. The arrogance has dissolved, replaced by cautious respect and awareness. I remain in my chair, calm, measured, aware that the work of influence is often invisible, subtle, yet far more enduring than any loud confrontation. I reflect on decades of patience, of silent guidance, of measured intervention. Today, all of that effort has converged into a single, undeniable lesson. Accountability, respect, and recognition of consequence are no longer theoretical. They are visible in every word, every hesitation, every thoughtful action. Late into the night, the final messages arrive. Dad, I understand now. I will do better. I see the value of what you taught me. I do not respond. Understanding, once internalized, manifests naturally in action and thought. The lesson has taken root. The balance has shifted. The household is quiet, yet charged with reflection and awareness. I sip the last of my tea, letting warmth settle through me. I watch the soft glow of lamps and the faint twinkle of distant city lights. Authority has been exercised not with anger, not with volume, but with patience, ethical action, and deliberate consequence. And tonight, in the calm, reflective silence of the house, I know the transformation has begun in earnest. The lesson is no longer a concept. It is alive, undeniable, and irreversible. The morning after the longest day, the house feels different. There is no tension, no expectation of confrontation. The subtle shifts of comprehension are visible in every gesture, every word, every pause my son makes. I move deliberately through the rooms, each step calm, measured, aware that the lesson has settled into place. The atmosphere is quiet, yet charged with reflection. My son approaches me cautiously. He does not rush. He does not speak before thinking. Dad, I see now. I understand what you meant. His voice carries humility, an acknowledgement that was absent just days before. I nod slightly, offering no further comment. The authority has been quietly established, and no words are needed to reinforce what has already been experienced. We sit together in the living room, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. I observe him as he recounts decisions, reflects on assumptions, and considers responsibilities he once overlooked. Every word, every pause, every glance reflects a transformation, not forced, not imposed, but realized through the deliberate consequences. I set into motion. Messages still arrive sporadically from the wedding organizers, confirming the cancellations and the reclaiming of the deposit. I handle each with calm precision, reinforcing that the lesson is not chaotic or punitive. It is orderly, legal, and undeniable. Actions have weight. Assumptions have consequences. Responsibility is unavoidable. Afternoon comes, and I retreat to the study, reviewing documents, sipping tea, and reflecting on the events of the past days. The lesson is no longer theoretical. It is embedded in behavior, observable in the subtle changes in tone, posture, and attentiveness. The arrogance that once dominated our interactions has been replaced with awareness and respect. By evening, the house carries a different energy. Conversations are measured, reflective, and deliberate. The quiet authority I maintained, the restraint, and the ethical execution of consequences have culminated in understanding. No yelling, no confrontation, no spectacle was necessary. The lesson is complete, embodied, and undeniable. Night falls. I sit in my favorite chair, watching shadows stretch across the walls. My son rests quietly in another room, reflecting, internalizing, and recalibrating his behavior. I sip my tea and feel a calm satisfaction, not an exerting control. but in witnessing the natural unfolding of comprehension and accountability. As I lean back, I realize that authority exercised with patience, clarity, and ethical intent endures far longer than anger or force. Respect is cultivated, not demanded. Lessons are internalized, not imposed. And tonight, in the quiet stillness of the house, the balance has shifted permanently.